everybody, and welcome to this lecture. I'm Omega, and here's what we're going to do tonight. This is going to be a conversation about podcasting. At the end of my lecture, I'll of course welcome any questions in Aquarium Text 1. So at the end of the lecture, please post those. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have. And for some reason, I have a hunch it's not only going to be about podcasting, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So let's talk about podcasting in nation states. Here's the basics. 1, just do it. The hardest thing about starting a podcast is starting. Once you start and you make it past your first couple of episodes, it becomes really easy to just keep doing it because you get in a habit of it. For example, I have a real life politics podcast I started doing in March. We're still going strong, and it's August, and neither of us really thought we'd be able to keep going, but here we are, and we're about to have our first guest on that show. Turning towards nation states, this is actually I'm currently on my 3rd podcast here in nation states. So let me detail a little bit of my history about that. In the South Pacific, I operated a independent news service called South Pacific News for on and off for about 4 years now. And we did what I like to call an audio digest called Here's the News, which was based off of kind of those BBC, basically news bulletins they used to do back in the day, where it'd be maybe 2 minutes of the host speaking and they'd go, the time is such and such the time is 7:08 p.m. on August 4th, 2020, and here's the news. And then they'd just give you a basic bulletin of the news. I did that for about 3 months or so and then got really bored with it and just stopped podcasting again. And for that, I did something super basic. I would just record a voice memo on my phone and just post the MP3 file up onto the forum because I'd upload it to Google Drive and then post a link to the Google Drive file and people could just listen to the MP3. And you know what? People actually enjoyed it, which I was quite surprised about, but it just didn't feel right. Later on, I joined the media team for our Ministry of Regional Affairs, and we started doing a TSP podcast called Real Time. Yes, it is based off of the HBO show by the same name by Bill Maher. And here's kind of the roadblock we hit with that. It was a lot of fun. We had some great people on. Seraph, I know, came on. Rovan came on. A couple others. But the problem is, doing a podcast in nation states is wholly dependent on if you can get guests to come on to the show. A little bit more about that later. So we'll just put that podcast into a roadblock. Then talking with a podcast for them for, I want to say, 2 years. And finally, I approached one of the board members and said, look, I want to do this, and I'm sorry my audio is being guys. Wi-Fi is I Discord, which is why I'm actually about podcast technology here in a minute. Yeah. All right. Oh no. Just check my connection. This is probably for the game. Like, make sure you've got that like good internet connection while you're doing this. It will matter. So here's what I'm going to do: is I'm going to switch over to my phone on data. So give me like 2 seconds.
Anyone who didn't hear that, he's just going to switch to his phone. Hopefully he'll have a better connection on that. He's just roboting.
Okay, howdy folks. So I'm back. Let me know if I'm coming through clear now. Just to like.
You're all good on my end.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, happy to do that. Okay, so like where I left off after the first podcast I did. Okay. So after Here's the News, I went over to the South Pacific, joined the Ministry of Regional Affairs, and became a member of their media team, where we rebooted the TSP podcast known as Real Talk, which is named after the Bill Maher show on HBO. That one was good, and we received a lot of positive feedback, but there were two big problems with it. One was listenership, and the other one was getting people on who would be willing to, do voice chat. I co-hosted that with Penguin over there. We had a blast and we had plans, but it was just really hard to get people onto the show. And we'll talk a bit more about guest selection and scheduling in a moment. Then I took a hiatus from podcasting for a while and approached Nation States Today about rebooting one of their podcasts kind of as an interview show / rank punditry about nation states gameplay kind of thing. And honestly, it's been a blast. So for those of you who don't listen to the newsroom, I highly recommend it. Of course, I'm the host of it, so we have a lot of fun. I do co-host it with Wyndham, who is in Osiris. And part of the reason for that is Wyndham and I are ideologically polar opposites in gameplay. So I'm a staunch defender, he's a staunch raider, but we also get along really well out of character. So it works out really well to be a really engaging and fun show. And we give each other a hard time all the time on that program. And so that podcast has had a lot of advantages because where we're an entire nation states podcast, our pool of guests is larger and the number of things we can talk about is greater as well. Because has GP been boring lately? Yes, but there's almost always something to talk about regardless. Or we can reminisce about old things like the last episode we did about the Osiris Civil War. So let's talk a little bit about how you start a podcast. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get a hosting service for your podcast. If you want to get on the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. There is one, I want to say Stitcher has its own process to get added to it. I haven't gone through that for any podcast I do. It's a bit complex. I don't worry about that much. But there is a free podcasting host that you can use. Now, Nation States Today doesn't use this. They use something else because they have a fancy tech team who knows what they're doing and creating an RSS feed and whatever. I, for my personal podcast and for the TSP podcast, didn't know what I was doing with that one. So what I ended up doing is there's a website that'll do it for free. As I already mentioned, it's called Anchor. It's like anchor.fm is the website. It's amazing. So here's what you do is you will record your podcast. A lot of people will use a bot here in Discord called Craig to record basically a voice chat with a lot of people for their recording of the podcast. And then they'll post that recording. They'll download the recording, convert it to an MP3 through Audacity. And I'll talk about Audacity in a second. And then they'll upload that recording into Anchor. And then you just hit publish, you title the episode, write a short description, and it gets distributed to all the major podcasting platforms, and it's wonderful. You can also just send people the link to the Anchor website, and it'll have links to all the different platforms where you can find the podcast on and take them directly to your podcast on that platform. So it's really easy to advertise with. It's really easy to help people find that platform they want to do, and then they can just subscribe on that platform to listen to the podcast. And it lets people just, listen to it on their phones on their way to work because it'll just come up in their podcasting feed. Or school. I mean, I know a lot of NSers are also in school. I'm a college student, so I get it. So that's hosting. Then there's audio recording. So as I mentioned, there's a bot for Discord called Craig that a lot of people like to use because it records separate audio feeds for each person in the voice chat, right? So let's say I'm doing a podcast with Wyndham over in Nation States Today. When we download that audio file and open it up in Audacity, there will be a separate audio track for me and for Wyndham. So if Wim needs to be muted somewhere, but I'm talking, we can mute Wim and I can still be heard talking without messing up my audio. So it's really useful to use Craig if you're going to record through Discord. For my real life politics podcast, I actually use a different recording software. I use something called Zencastr. I just prefer it because it records each person locally and then uploads their recordings to the cloud, which I think is convenient and it works better for my needs for the real life show. But that's when you get a bit more established and kind of know what you're doing a little bit more. You'll turn to something like that. And that one you can pay a monthly fee to use, or you can just do 8 hours a month for free. So it works well. So moving on. That's kind of recording. What you can also do, if you're really advanced, is each person can record a separate track on Audacity on their computer, and then you can have your editor sync those up and create them into one unified track. Now, what that does is it means that there's no chance of internet connection affecting anything about your podcast, which is useful, as we established earlier in this lecture. It's useful when there's no internet connection stuff kind of messing with you. But then, so for the Real Life Politics podcast, though, we did that for 2 months. And I know I'm not telling you all the name of that. I don't feel like doxing myself today. And those of you who aren't laughing right now need to be funnier. But I was doing the editing for that, and let me tell you, it was exciting. It was exciting, to say the least. I'm really glad we moved over to Zencastr. Back to the point. You're going to want to download Audacity anyways, regardless, because it's the easiest way to edit audio. It's really simple. Not simple, but intuitive to learn how to use it. And there's a lot of YouTube videos about like basics for editing and Audacity for podcasters. Like it's wonderful. So, even if you don't know what you're doing, you can watch like an hour of YouTube stuff and you'll kind of know what you're doing. And then there's a lot of learning on the job. So I learned how to like shut out background noise from one person in a podcast. That was a big day. Also, you should really just find a quiet room in your house, and preferably a carpeted one so there's no echo, and preferably one where like you hang up a bunch of quilts on the wall to also reduce echo. If you're not going to get a full studio, don't get a studio for a Nation States podcast. You're not making money off of this thing. Oh my goodness, yeah, you're not making money off of this thing. Just find a room in your house. So let's actually talk a little bit about equipment. I have a good microphone. I bought a good microphone to do my podcasting on. It cost me about $75. It had cost me about $75. It came with a boom arm and with a really high quality PMP cord and a really high quality pop filter. And so I really like using that. I was using that earlier in this lecture until my internet connection on my laptop started messing with me, which it seems to like to do these days, which is a little annoying, to be quite honest. But it's okay. We'll forgive the old machine. But yeah, oh my goodness, yeah. Buying a good microphone is a good investment just in general, because here's the deal. Once you have one, you will find uses for it. Oh my goodness. I use it to talk on Discord all the time when my laptop decides it wants to connect to the internet. I use it for Zoom calls. I use it for, basically like video conference. Oh no. Okay. All right. I think I cut out there for a moment. I don't know why. My phone wants to be weird. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, so that's kind of buying a good microphone is a solid investment. So make sure you find the right one. In my opinion, it's worth it, especially if you're going to end up doing, a Nation States podcast. You also have a personal podcast. And, eventually if you start making money off of a podcast through sponsorships, which you're not going to do in Nation States, you will, you're not going to make money doing a podcast in Nation States, like period. Because here's the deal. Advertisers pay by the 1,000 listens, right? So even my politics podcast, we just passed 500 all-time listeners, and we're really psyched about that. And we've seen our listenership growing, as has the Nation States Today podcast. We've been seeing numbers on that grow as well, from what I understand. So we're really excited about the growing audience, but like, you're not making money until you're getting like 2,000 listens per episode. And with a Nation States podcast, there simply isn't a wide enough audience for that at this point. I wish there was right now. Like if you had a League of Legends podcast, right, and you could build that up to where it became profitable, right? Because there's enough people playing it, but there's just not enough people playing Nation States Today for it to make sense for you to try and find sponsorships for it. So just accept the fact you're not going to get sponsorships and that you're just doing this pro bono, and it's fun. Okay. So let me turn a bit to now like the podcast itself. How do I actually host a podcast? One, I standardize my intro and my outro, right? So on the Real Life Politics podcast, actually, we're not even going to tell you about that intro, but we have theme music for that one. We have an outro for that one. I always start out with, howdy, I'm Redacted, and welcome back to Redacted. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Redacted. Redacted, how are you doing today? Where it says Redacted, those are all names of things. And then on the newsroom, of course, I always start with, howdy, and welcome back to the newsroom. I'm your host, Omega, and boy, do we have a great panel for you this week. I am joined, as always, by my co-host and the public relations director for Nation States Today, Wyndham. So I standardized that intro, and I change the positive description of the panel every week or every time we do an episode, but that's really about it for an intro. And then for the outro for Nation States Today, I quite literally have a script that I read at the end of every episode that literally basically lays out like the views expressed in this podcast are not the views of Nation States Today, which is something you'll want to do if you are doing it under a media arm, just because it can help with GP issues. Because say someone says something on the podcast that's controversial, and then people in GP get all like in a hissy fit about it. By having that disclaimer in there, you can go, no, that's not the view of the media organization or like their organization. That's just their personal view. So, really, it doesn't even count. And we have a running joke on the Nation States Today podcast that every time someone says like, I'm not speaking in an official capacity, we just, oh boy, yeah. So that's our, that's why we do a disclaimer. And we also say like, the people speaking are not representing their organization unless stated otherwise, right? So like when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs for TSP, I'd often say like, oh, I'm not speaking for TSP, or I'd just say no comment, just to help prevent that as well. But like, if you're a Minister of Foreign Affairs, you're always speaking for your region. Like just so you know, those of you who want to be MOFAs or are MOFAs, I know the TSP MOFAs listening to this right now, you're always speaking for your region. I'm sorry, but like that's how the job works. Hi, Jay. I hope it's going well. And don't be afraid to have some like inside jokes on the podcast or really get like non-formal. Like honestly, the moments on the newsroom that I think are the best are when we have just discussion about like stuff that's going on. Like when we're just doing casual conversation about like, oh no, defenders are evil, or like, oh no, raiders are evil. Like those are like the funniest parts when we just like break down and just start doing casual stuff. But like, let's talk about guests. So getting guests is one thing. I don't actually do that a lot for the Nation States Today podcast. That's handled by my co-host, actually, Wyndham, and he does a terrific job at it. But here's the advantage of doing something for a large region's media for Nation States Today, and some of the advantage for doing it with TSP is that it's a good way for someone to gain visibility. Right, because if you're a government official, you want to be noticed by people. Like you do. Like you have an ego of some kind. You want people to acknowledge you and realize that you're like around and doing stuff. So the newsroom over on Nation States Today provides a really easy way to reach a large mass market audience really quickly. Simply because the Nation States Today has the reach it does, and so many people are in the Discord, so they'll see the notification that the podcast came out, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the flip side of that is that in nation states, only a certain number of people actually voice chat, much less want their voice recorded on a podcast, right? So that's kind of where we have to, that's where we run into a lot of issues, is finding people who we want to have on the show who will also voice chat. So there's a number of folks who I've reached out to, I'm not going to name any names, who are like, oh yeah, love the podcast. And I'm like, oh, do you want to come on? Like, no, I don't really voice chat. Sorry. It's an issue that you're going to run into. And that's why Real Talk and TSP had to be suspended. Was there simply weren't enough people willing to come on a podcast and voice chat and it be recorded and published to the internet, right? So that was really why Real Talk failed in TSP, was we simply couldn't get enough people who were willing to come on. Right now, there are some superstar guests. Zoriat from the New Pacific Order is a great one. Pridania, the delegate of TMP, is a great one. Seraph and Roven, both former high-ranking government officials here in the South Pacific. Well, I guess Seraph still is. He's Minister of Regional Affairs. All of them are terrific guests to have on podcasts. They've all come on the Newsroom podcast. Seraph and Roven both came on Real Talk. So one key thing I would recommend if you're going to try and do a regional podcast is that you don't limit yourself only to folks in your region. Listen to a podcast like the Newsroom, notice who comes on, and see, oh, could I get that person to also come on our podcast? Because a good Minister of Foreign Affairs, if they're allied with TMP, if they also went on the Newsroom podcast, they'd love to come on to the TMP podcast. Or if they're TMP's Minister of Foreign Affairs and they went on the Newsroom podcast, then they should want to come on the TSP podcast, right? It's using the politics involved in nation states and knowing who is willing to voice chat by podcasts that will allow you to actually build up a repertoire of people you know will come on podcasts and who you can ask and have a higher chance of them saying yes. Let's talk about actually interviewing people. So when I do an interview, I always start by introducing the person. And I always take the kind of late night talk show host approach to introducing people, where I list what they do before saying their name, right? So let's say I'm introducing myself on the Newsroom, right? So if I was introducing myself, here's how it would go. Our first guest this week is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs for the South Pacific and a governor on the Board of Governors for Nation States Today, as well as being named a member of the Power 20 for the July 2020 edition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Omega. And then you get the person to say, oh, it's great to be here, or whatever, and you tell them you're going to do that beforehand. You make sure you have their bio before you do it, because if you list off things and like, oh, you forgot to mention, it doesn't look good, right? But you tell them you're going to do that, and then they can do like a really quick, like, oh, hi, so-and-so, or like, oh, hey, great to be here, or whatever. And you should always talk like you have an audience for your show, because even though there's not necessarily going to be people listening to it as it's recorded, there will be people listening in. There's going to be an audience later anyways. So it works out quite nicely that way. So there's that. That's kind of introducing guests, getting guests on. Your guest is on the show. You've introduced them. How do you start your interview? Well, here's what I like to do. I like to have maybe 3 or 4 questions kind of like up my sleeve, ready to go at any point that I know are good. A lot of times for the Newsroom, we try to get on guests who are related to current events happening in gameplay, so they know what they're going to be talking about. Sometimes I might give a guest a heads up about what we're going to be talking about, just in case there's something off limits. I don't want to like question them about something they really shouldn't be talking about on air, because then you put them in an uncomfortable situation. Now, it's worth noting, I'm the good cop on the Newsroom podcast. Wim is the bad cop and will ask anybody about anything, because he's happy to watch you kind of squirm and have to go like, oh, if you know that's espionage, no comment. Like he's really happy to hear that. And that does create for good material, but it's just not my personal, it's not my personal style. So those are kind of what I do. Now, I tend to let the conversation kind of guide itself and present questions as I need them. I did a podcast recently with Marbuk and Pridania, where, Marbuk was leaving the delegacy of the East Pacific. Pridania was coming into the delegacy for the TMP. And so it created a really nice contrast, right? You have this one person who's kind of cementing and there's one person who wants to start a legacy, right? So I asked a lot of questions related to that. I asked a couple related to like, oh, how do you win an election? Like, there's a lot of if you do your homework on your guests, the questions will come naturally. Is really the easiest way to put it. So that's kind of doing interviews. So we talked about kind of the technical stuff, doing interviews. That's most of it. If you want to be a really effective host, you have to be following the news for whatever it is. So like for my Real Life Politics podcast, me and my co-host are DMing each other on Twitter all week long, like, oh my goodness, did you see this story in the New York Times? And sending them a link to the story. Or, oh my goodness, did you see what National Review just ran? Oh my goodness, I'm revealing bias now by saying the words National Review. All the TSPers in here who talk real life politics with me aren't shocked, but those of you in TMP, yeah. But so you just need to keep up with the news to actually be an effective host, because if you don't know what's going on, it doesn't make sense to bring in guests who are intimately involved with what's going on, because you're not going to be able to guide them through into an interesting discussion, right? An interview is only as strong as the interviewer. The interviewee might be horrible at doing interviews, and a strong interviewer is going to guide them and help them have a fun time doing it, put them at ease. Or if you choose to play bad cop like Wim does, for those of you aware, Wim is kind of our Andrew Neil on the newsroom, right, where he's going to ask you hard-hitting questions. If you're kind of that kind of interviewer, which is not my style, to be clear, it becomes really easy to embarrass someone if they don't know what they're talking about, right? Or if they're not comfortable interviewing, which can be good podcasting. It's just not what I like to do, because the way I podcast, I'm trying to make it where people want to come back on the show later, right? Because there are only so many people who are going to be willing to podcast, right? So you have to be aware that at some point you're going to reuse guests, period. And so you don't want your guests to have had such a bad experience that they're unwilling to ever come back on the show. So it's been 30 minutes of me kind of monologuing here. I get really uncomfortable doing this, of course, because I don't like monologuing on any podcast I do anyways. I like it to be more discussion based. So I'm happy to start taking questions. I'll start with the two that are already kind of in the chat. So how do you shut out background noise from individual speakers? Does it require separate tracks that Craig produces? Yes, it does require separate tracks. What you do is you can go to where they're not speaking, and you can use one of the tools in Audacity that kind of looks like two triangles around a line, and you can use that to kind of like zero out their volume when they're not speaking, and it's really useful. And then the other question I have is, from experience, how long would you say is the ideal length for a podcast? So I do 2 podcasts. They both have a different ideal length. So for my politics podcast, we shoot for between 30 minutes to an hour, right? So we want it to be longer than 30 minutes, but we want it to be shorter than an hour because it's only 2 of us talking, and that gets pretty boring after a while. Because here's the deal. Neither me or my friend are like high-level political operatives or anything, right? So we're not exactly the most engaging. I mean, we are very engaging, but like, we're just there doing rank punditry, right? And people don't want to hear that. But when we have a guest on, we'll normally be okay with doing maybe an hour, 15 minutes, or an hour and a half, because we have a guest on and they're providing something special, something unique, something the audience doesn't normally get to hear about. So we'll vary it up with that. But yeah, so that's kind of length. For the newsroom, we don't necessarily have. We just go until Wim or I say, all right, we need to wrap it up because it's feeling like it's getting long. And because with our panels, we can go all day long because we can just kind of use, we can always bring up the good old, so defenderism, good or bad, go, or things like that. And it's really easy to just kind of generate a conversation that way. All right, so what criteria do you use to select guests? So when it came to the TSP podcast, we actually got to a point where, basically anyone would be fine, right? Because we just didn't have people willing to come on. But for the newsroom, what we do is we try to talk to government officials primarily, or former high-ranking government officials who are still, around and doing things, right? So like Rowan wasn't prime minister the last time we had him on the Nation State Today podcast. We were also doing a special episode about Lazarus, and he was a key player in the Lazarene Civil War. Prytania is an incoming delegate, was when we interviewed him, an incoming delegate for a major GCR, TMP, the largest region in the game. Ministers of Foreign Affairs are always good to have on because they're easy to make a little bit uncomfortable and make them say no comment, and that's always a little bit fun. So that's a key way we do it. So if y'all have questions, put them in Aquarium text 1. Like, please ask more questions. I'm happy to keep going at this. I'm also happy to talk about like when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Like, I know that's a little bit different, but like, yeah. Oh, how do you handle guests which have terrible audio? You mentioned recording it individually via Audacity. Okay, so we do mic checks about 15 minutes before the show starts, just to kind of check everybody's audio connection, oftentimes my internet connection. And we should do them more often. And when we have a guest that just we've been fortunate on the newsroom to not really with just terrible audio. Normally the terrible audio comes from me, so that's been really fortunate because that's really what it is. So when I have terrible audio, I just switch over to my phone like I did, and everything works fine, and my co-host just takes over for a little while. When I do the real life podcast with the software we use, I also have a better internet connection for that one. It's not really a big issue, in all honesty, so that's really nice and really helpful. I don't know. I hope that answers it. It is annoying, don't get me wrong, and if it just gets like really garbled somewhere, we'll just have our editor cut it out. How much of a role does a consistent publication schedule play in audience? Oh, yeah, a consistent publication schedule is huge. So the newsroom is currently on hiatus with real life politics. Like I work for a campaign, so I'm busy with real life politics. I'm also busy with, I'm about to move back to university, so there's a lot happening. So that one's on hiatus right now, which is a bit rough. But for the real life one, we try and publish every week, either late Thursday or late Friday night, so people have the whole weekend to listen to the podcast. Because not a lot of podcasts come out over weekends, right? So it lets us be kind of in their feed for the entire weekend and let them have time to get to it. And where it's a current events podcast, that one, it really is relevant that, people listen to it in a timely fashion, because you can't listen to a current events podcast from four weeks ago and it still be interesting. And it's really the same thing with the newsroom, is we want to publish them as soon as possible after an event that we want to cover happens, right? But with the real life one, there's always stuff to cover every week. So we just do it once a week, and it works pretty much like that. How long would you say audio editing typically takes? How much work do you typically do after a podcast to clean up the audio? Well, it depends. So what I like to do is when I'm recording, I will have a piece of paper in front of me where I will write down the timestamp of any like big audio thing I think that went wrong. So like if there was like a loud crash or something, I'll write that timestamp down so I can make sure I edit that out. Or if there's just a moment where like someone said something really wrong and we need to make sure I'll like stop the whole podcast and I'll be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to restart starting with these words, and we'll just get back on it from there, and I'll just cut everything else out and you'll be okay. Is kind of what we'll do in those situations. And that takes a little bit longer, but normally for me, what it really comes down to is I want to balance to make sure that the speakers are all around the same volume. And that takes maybe 45 seconds to a minute. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, of course, make sure the tracks are synced up. That can take a while depending if you're using a service like Craig or Zencastr versus if you're just having each person record a separate track and you're, say, talking over a voice chat anyways. So that can be a bit more difficult, and that could take a little bit of time. Then what I'll do is I'll mix down the tracks into one, and I'll look for large gaps of silence that shouldn't be there. So sometimes someone is making a point and they intentionally does. All right, what's the average time taken for the whole? And so I'll just look for those gaps and I'll cut them out, and I'll really make sure that the output is really good and synced, because what we do is in the real life podcast, we're going to call it the newsroom, just so I have a name. For the newsroom, I'm Omega, and then my co-host says and I'm so and so. And then I say, thanks for talking. And then I say, we'll talk to y'all soon. Right. And I just want to make sure that sounds really like well put together. So that I'll spend a bit more time editing. So what's the average time taken for the whole process of publishing, recording, editing, publication? Well, I want to add on guest recruitment to that list, actually. So guest recruitment, recording, editing, publication. If you start with guest recruitment, it can be about a week. Right. So you want to start recruiting your guests about a week before so you can schedule with them and get that set. Then from recording, editing to publication, I can't speak about the newsroom because I don't edit it or publish it. But for my own podcast, it takes, it can take up to 3 hours because we'll do a little conversation beforehand, make sure we have the outline for the go. We kind of know what we're going to be talking about. And then we have to record, which can take upwards of an hour. And then I have to download the recordings, sync them, edit them, render that into an MP3 file, upload the MP3, put in the episode title and description, and then click publish. And that can take up to 3 hours, right? So if we start recording at 8, if we start the process at 8 o'clock, I might not be done till 11, maybe even later. Now, if you're doing this, it's a labor of love. And I highly recommend having than just, one person doing all the kind of like back end work because, it's a lot, but you get used to it, you get used to it. You become kind of adept at what you're doing and you get really, really good at like I've gotten faster. It used to take me maybe 3.5, 4 hours to do all the editing. So like it gets easier. So don't worry. The more you do, the better you get at it. If that kind of makes sense. Hershey, come here. Okay, I see someone else is typing something, so I'm gonna wait for there it is. Are you the only one at Innis Today who does the editing? Have you considered training anyone else? I don't do the editing for the Nation States Today podcast, actually. That's all done by Lewis. So he does the editing for that, not me, which is really, really helpful because it just means I get to focus on the content side of things and I don't have to worry about the newsroom is Innis Today, actually. Now, when I did Real Talk for TSP, I was the one doing the editing. Cumbersome. And it's rough. And for the Real Life Politics podcast, I'm also the only one doing the editing because our co-host is not exactly the most he's not exactly the most technologically adept, despite being my age. So yeah. And here's the deal with training someone else to help is that it'd be really hard to do that and pay them where the podcast generates $0. Actually, right now the podcast is at a net negative 150 because we both bought $75 microphone kits. Yeah, we're not paying anyone anytime soon. Not until we get those sweet advertiser dollars once our podcast goes mainstream. So when about 100 times more people start listening to my Real Life podcast than do currently, and we're raking in that like sweet $30 a week, we'll see what happens. Okay, what made you choose a traditional podcast for the nation's newsroom opposed to video formats like YouTube? For example, since MBS serves not just as a news service, but as a training service for TNP, we sometimes have the need to show our viewers something. Do you ever have accessibility issues with people having trouble accessing a podcast platform? So we chose to do a podcast because, like, in all honesty, there's been a resurgence in media markets. They become kind of a thing again. You'll notice almost every politician seems to have a podcast, right? Like Ted Cruz has a podcast. Why does Ted Cruz have a podcast? No one knows, but he does. Joe Biden, I think, has a podcast. Why does Joe Biden need a podcast? I don't know, but like it's just kind of become a key part of the media again. So what we assumed was a lot of our listeners will already listen to other podcasts. And so adding another one isn't that big a deal. Do we have accessibility issues? Sorry, I'm going to cough here for a moment. And that's why you have water with you when you podcast. Like always have water with your podcast. Oh my goodness, always. Because here's the deal. I can edit out the drinking sound. and it's fine, and it helps me keep going. So like, always have water with you when you podcast. But no, we don't really have accessibility issues because you can top on a smart home device, on your phone. We didn't really ran into any accessibility issues. If you're going to do a real life podcast, the biggest issue you're going to have is building up your audience, right? So like, I find myself telling almost everyone I know, hey, I do a podcast, you should tune in real life. And in nation states, me and Wim will find ourselves like every time an episode comes, oh, hey, so like, really the biggest thing you're going to have issues with is advertising, not necessarily people being able to access the podcast. I'm glad y'all are asking all these questions. Okay, question. How do you effectively publicize your NS podcast? What's the best way to build NS viewer/listenership? Well, we got lucky with the newsroom and that we're doing it at Nation States Today because they have such a huge reader base that we were tapping into that it became easy to kind of like just publicize it using their Discord and throw something into the weekly edition, and just we got really lucky with that. Now, the best way to publicize it though is honestly just go into the in-character gameplay section on the GP forums, and so long as your podcast is gameplay related, you can just mention it there, right? And where gameplay, includes so many things, I mean, it's easy to just publicize it there. Use your region, have pings go out. Your cultural affairs or regional affairs office or whoever should be like promoting the heck out of it to your game side members, to your forum side, to your Discord side, if that's going to become a thing. I hope that's a thing. Like, just go ham with the promotion. There, you should talk to everyone you can that, hey, I have a podcast, you should listen. Or, hey, TMP has a podcast, you should listen to it. Right? Like, just do as much of that as possible. Will you feel like you're annoying? Yes. But if people listen and like it, victory. And the best way to build up viewership or listenership, I guess, is create a good product, right? People are going to keep tuning in if it's a good product. So give them something good, right? Don't give them something mediocre. Like, people aren't going to want to listen to mediocre. They're going to want to listen to good. And if you start delivering a good product, people will tune in and people will want to come on the show. Yeah. Yeah. So I've never been a big fan of written transcripts or summaries, really. I mean, the only summary you need is the episode description. Like, here's what the podcast is about. But I find transcripts miss the point of doing an audio exercise, in that there's inflection in the voice, there's sarcasm you don't get, there's humor you don't get, there's like bickering over things you don't get in a transcript. So I don't mess around with transcripts, personally speaking. Now, to get feedback, we just ask for feedback on the Discord. Like, if people want to give me feedback, just hit up my PMs. Like, I'm all about getting feedback on anything I do. With my real life podcast, we like tell people, like, here's our Twitter. Tweet at us about things you like and don't like. Tell us what you want us to do. Right? And things like that we found actually work. People will tell us what they like and don't like. And it's actually been really helpful in becoming better at podcasting. So like, a key thing I've been having to work on is not saying and forcing myself to just stop, think about the words I want without using a filler word, or like was one I was really bad with. In fact, I just used it then, or like. So that's part of just creating a good product, is noticing your own things that you don't do well, because your audience will notice them immediately. All right. Anything else? I see another one coming. I'm ready. And I'm going to hang on for 8 more minutes, because then we'll hit an hour, and I think that's good. What advice do you have for TMP's MBS? We aren't anywhere near a consistent publication schedule. We certainly have a lot to improve on in order to create better content. Okay. Basic advice. Get a consistent publication schedule. It doesn't have to be every week. It can be every 2 weeks. It can be, we'll do it twice a month on the first and third Saturdays of the month or whatever. Like, just get something consistent so people know to expect it is really big. And when you're not going to be able to be consistent, just tell people, hey, here's when we'll be back with another episode. And kind of the other thing is just find engaging people. If you can talk to engaging people, it'll create engaging conversation, which leads to a quality podcast, in my opinion. Do I have any advice to anyone wishing to start an NS podcast? Just go for it, and don't just record yourself talking into a voice memo on your phone and publishing the MP3. Like, that's not a podcast. Like, you should find a co-host, you should do it with someone, and you should invest some time in just basic editing skills, because that's going to go a long way to creating a product that people are going to want to use. Okay. I'm going to do a last call for questions now. I saw that. Don't worry. But yeah, just kind of a last call for questions. Anyone? All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope I didn't bore you with too much kind of insider baseball talk here. But thank you all for tuning in. And that's all from me.